actually something I'd be interested in. Brooks, you always you did at least for some time try to explain the subject in relation to some concept of the virtual, and so my understanding of the virtual is purely based on Bergson, and in my understanding of Bergson, what you said wouldn't make really sense. I'd be interested in hearing how you see the virtual functioning in Anti-Oedipus.
So, how I've understood the virtual is anything that is essentially something that comes from the interaction from lower level things. Very shitty way of putting it. Screen on a computer doesn't just display things; it displays virtual screen of what is basically the result of 1,000 incredibly complicated interactions per second across my entire computer. In the same way, the subject is the virtual of basically all of my interactions across desiring and social machines in any given moment. And that sort of fount that comes out, that virtual item, is very real. I very much have always loved Deleuze's sort of take on that. Is it's real, but not actual, ideal, not abstract, which is a complex way of talking about the virtual. And I haven't spent time recently rereading this, and I'm only halfway through my coffee this morning, slept like an hour. So please forgive me if I'm misspeaking on any of this, but that's essentially where I've played with it. A lot of this stems from that sort of take stems from how I view people when they're playing games or doing my VR stuff or interacting with things that I've built. The ability to manipulate someone and have their what we would call sort of classical subjectivization happen is something that's incredibly manipulative. Now, it's not that it's not them in that moment. It's also not that it is them. It's the virtual. That's what makes sort of the subject exist in any given place where we're able to be many different things across all of it. And so if we were to take that sort of idea and apply it to Deleuze, I see that being, as they talk about in this chapter, the desiring machines meeting the social machines. That moment or that horizon between the two, where the desiring machines are being turned into or connected to, just before that is when the subject is created. That to me is the virtual layer, because the social machines coming from our molar investments above and the larger interactions we have with other people that are incredibly complex in millions of different ways we can't understand, connecting to our own desiring machines that are doing millions of things. And in that, I get to pretend that I exist for a while. And often I'm actually completely not concerned with my own existence. And in those moments, that's when the sort of virtual subjectivization, I think, is maybe least strong, but it's when it's sort of operating at.
I'd have a different thing, though. Because when you're saying that what you're seeing on the computer is the virtual,
Yes,
I would tend to say that it is what you do not see on the computer screen that is the virtual. The virtual is like a reserve in a sense. It's the reserve. The potential. The virtual is a reserve of potentials. It's potentialities. So basically, a computer, it perform certain tasks, but it could perform other tasks. This is the virtual of the computer,
right.
And into this the arrangement or the organization of the potential that makes them pass into the actual. You have a certain expression of intensities that actually arise can be observed. So in a computer, for example, it's in the common sense, what's on the screen is the virtual. But what's on the screen is the actualized potentialities or of this object as a partial object and not as a full object, because you cannot exhaust the object or the potential.
We're not talking about two different things, though. We're talking about now two different things. I should have been a lot more clear. Let me restate slightly. The screen as is a surface of potentiality. Yes. The thing that is displayed on the screen is the virtual. There's a difference here. One is things that have been, let's say, perceived in that moment of perception that has been integrated into a desiring machine that has been sort of taken apart and made actual. Let's say hardened, concretized. That's no longer the virtual. Right on the other side of that sort of preeminent, pre-concrete moment is when it is virtual. It's still very real. That's.
Oh yes. Because the reality of an object or a thing, let's say a thing because it's not objectified yet, the potential, the virtual and the actual are both real because they are the reality of this thing as I would say a totality, but like it's everything it can encompass. So like for example, a human has a lot of virtual but only a small part is being actualized, and the actual is refeeding back into the virtual at some point because contrary to a computer that is like the with the strict hardware, a human is adaptive. It changes. So like the virtual of the human is always changing as it processes into certain forms of individuation.
So I'm wondering about this screen example because I can't really square that with Bergson at all. And specifically because I don't think there's much of a difference between like a screen and like any other image.
Any surface of inscription, yes.
Sorry, I didn't get that. You were very silent.
Oh, okay, sorry. As any surface of inscription.
Yes.
The screen is one inscription amongst many.
Yes, and then the other thing is that in Bergson, the virtual, as far as he actually talks about the virtual, definitely only exists in relation to consciousness.
Yeah, but in Deleuze they don't.
Yeah, that's the funny thing, because I think there is a bit of that in Deleuze and how Deleuze reads Bergson as well, because the relation between consciousness and the virtual and the actual would be that they are basically two sides of consciousness. So you have so basically the virtual has to pass through the subject to become actualized. That's the relationship that Deleuze reads into Bergson in Bergsonism, I think, and that's why I say that my understanding, at least in Deleuze's reading of Bergson, it doesn't really make sense to say that the subject exists in the virtual or is virtual, because it's much more that these two ontological realms are separated by the subject or are defined in relation to the subject.
Okay, but I think that you are it's different types of ontologies, and in Deleuze it's not the transcendence of the consciousness of the subject, it's the transcendence of the immanent plane that is producing the subject. So there's the slight difference there, but in your explanation that you just give us, you're going back to a more Husserlian kind of understanding of consciousness. So I don't know if there's I never analyzed the difference between Bergson and Deleuze, but Deleuze is consciousness arises from the plane of immanence, and it's a result. It's not something that transcends consciousness. It's not it's not the core of its ontology. It's something that is being produced by the flux and matter and their organization.
So I don't think Bergson would pose the subject as transcendent as well, because like these Yeah, but as I said, I just posted in chat because Jack asked where I would position the passive synthesis in this, and if I would just translate what I understand of Deleuze's understanding of Bergson into Anti-Oedipus, I would say that where Deleuze identifies the subject in Bergson between the actual and the virtual. There he positions the passive synthesis. Like the passive synthesis are exactly what actualizes the virtual, and that's actually where time is produced through the process. Like that's the whole thing of process, right? Production is actualizing the virtual. But that brings in the problem where to position the subject. But I would say that the subject is in that sense actual, because or the subject might be the feedback loop that feeds back into the virtual. I don't know. That's actually kind of what I'm getting at with the question when I ask where is the virtual in Anti-Oedipus, because by deplacing the subject in relation to where Deleuze places it in Bergson, there's stuff happening with the relationship between the actual and the virtual that I can't really figure out yet. And I'm a bit wary of assuming the relationship between the actual, the virtual, and the subject to be too straightforward.
I don't know.
Exactly. But let's go back to let's get another example, because now we're getting stuck into the subject.
I genuinely felt like there's that scene, Simpsons. Homer's trying to get Mr. Burns' package. I'm Mr. Burns. I'm here to get my package. All right, Mr. Burns, and what's your first name? I don't know. Is really how I felt. I didn't say I had a complete philosophical treatise, Lou.
But if we want to go to...
I thought you were asking for my musings, and now I'm going over Bergsonism and trying to go over everything.
All right. So to give another example, let's go back to Anti-Oedipus, and where is Anti-Oedipus as as a model? So a model is never something that is actualized. It's something that can and will belong to the virtual. So, for example, the Oedipus model of psychoanalysis is something that takes place into the virtual. It is through different means, different instrument, different exercises, confession or whatever on the side of the subject or the patient, that it can be actualized. So if we take this model, Oedipus, or we take phallocratic or patriarchal models, they are into the virtual. They need certain dispositives, certain apparatus to become actual. And the actual, it's weird to say, like I'm saying actual and actually, but the actual feeds back into the virtual by proving it or disproving it into a set of mutual adjustments. So there's always this play between the virtual and the actual. It's never like a straight, linear relationship between the virtual to the actual. The actual is feeding back constantly into the virtual. So, and if we wanted to have like a different model than Oedipus, it would still be into the virtual and would be actualized. Or, this model could be the result of observation of the actual and description and mapping, cartography, and then its representation would go back into the virtual.
I have a question about the virtual. So I'm trying to is there kind of an analogy between what we're calling the virtual and the psychic plane that might be in like Lacan, where this like real the like intrusion of the real is something that doesn't ever happen because our brains can't handle it?
No.
No. Okay.
I think, and anyone who wants to jump in, I know we have a few people who are more versed in Lacan and Deleuze than I am, but Deleuze, in all of my readings, has basically completely shut out that idea that there is this imperceptible underneath layer, and instead he reorients everything towards being this plane of possibility. The idea of there being a real that's impenetrable and that we could not directly perceive because of how we've gained knowledge and how our knowledge works, which is sort of the Lacanian idea, totally not within Deleuzian thought.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But I'm still getting the impression that, like, even if Deleuze wants there to be like he doesn't agree with Lacan's like conception of what the real is. I still have the impression that he's borrowing a lot from Lacan, and when we were talking about these sort of like virtual and these psychic plane things. But maybe that's just because I'm misunderstanding the virtual, and I was wondering if we could like whether or not there's a connection there.
To just briefly interject, it's important to keep in mind too, though, that they're laying out syllogisms and paralogisms, right? So certain aspects of like what Lacan will argue, whether or not it's happening virtually, right? There's a point they're making about a paralogism happening. For instance, the use of the phallus and lack.
Okay, I guess because where I'm like hung up are the other sort of sections where they talk about like Lacan has this system that distributes lack everywhere, but then the flip side of that system is the what is it, real disorganization of desire, I think is the direct quote. It sort of reads like there's a lot of this book that's like rehabilitating that idea, these ideas from Lacan, and sort of adding on to them, right? Undermining certain parts about like, Lacan was wrong when he said that the real is this unknowable thing that intrudes into psychic plane and it's always this like calamity that you can't verbalize for whatever Lacan said. But we can take these ideas from him about like, I'm out of my depth, but I would appreciate other input about this problem.
Can you guys hear me?
We do, yes.
Yeah, I think the calamity part is because of the personalization of the flow of the symbolic. So when the subject is back into a structure of a centralized self, or an ego that's present in the subjectivity, then all the movement of signification kind of begins to bind to the ego, and all of a sudden, whereas I think there's the displacement that was talked about earlier in a different perceptual system keeps the subject more fluid and less reified by the movements through the symbolic and the imaginary of the subject. I think what happens is that there are snags in the imaginary of the subject within the Lacanian perceptual consciousness system versus the ebbs and flows that is structured or is laid out in the cartography here of the anti-Oedipus.
I'm latching onto that word snags. I think that's a good way to describe one of the problems they have with it. They talk about the sort of traps laid out for desire.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about that too, around whether there's any excess that's present for the subject, surplus, that the lack then gets snagged on. So the insecurity there by way of the surplus that's provided by the exogenous system of capital that causes this short circuiting or the snags for the subject. I don't know if you guys can hear me or if that's breaking up or.
No, we can hear you. I did also link to Caldwell has a great few paragraphs. It's a short piece called "Schizophrenizing Lacan," where he just literally answers this question and kind of breaks down very top line Lacanian belief, how they sort of took it to task, where they agreed, and where they like. The thread that kind of pulls, if we want to go through psychoanalysis to schizoanalysis, the thread is about Lacan taking Freud but decentering the subject. That was his entire play. The idea of the unconscious as, just to quote, Lacanian disciple Jacqueline Miller puts it, Lacan took the unconscious not as a container, but rather as something existent outside itself that is connected to a subject who has a lack of being. Unconscious desire is caused by this lack of being in the other self and is directed towards attaining absolute recognition of this impossible completion in the eyes of the other, the mother in the case of the Oedipal complex. Every articulation of this need, however, is fragmented by the demand to have it recognized. As Lacan famously said, desire is the desire of the other, the object petit a. This lack, this thing you can never have. And as he goes on, while Deleuze and Guattari support Lacan's decentering of the Cartesian subject, they find certain elements of the formulation of desire reactive from a Nietzschean perspective. By defining desire in terms of lost objects, Lacan, and psychoanalysis generally, forces desire into an idealistic conception. Rather than remaining stuck within this pessimistic formation, Deleuze and Guattari see Lacan's idea of the object A as a means through which to bring about reversal of the situation. And note, they claim, Lacan's admirable theory of desire appears to us to have two poles, one related to the object petit a as a desiring machine, which defines desire in terms of production, thus going beyond both any idea of need and any idea of fantasy, and the other related to the great other as a signifier, which reintroduces a notion of lack. And this is the thread of sort of how they move their way through.
Yeah, so what I'm distilling then is, the ontological difference, I guess, that comes through regarding like Lacan is this perception of seeking. There's always like the missing piece, whereas I feel like the Deleuzian Guattari framework is more about the immanence of the abundance, where the subject can choose amidst the abundance that's actually here.
That's actually a really fair way to put it. The way they basically read Lacan, and again, I say they because I don't know if it's Guattari or Deleuze who did this. I would lean towards it being Deleuze, with Guattari coming in to bring up some of those bona fides. But the reading of it is that Lacan said that the object petit a and the subject, the unconscious, produce lack. That phrasing is a really unique one when it comes to sort of the history of psychoanalysis and the history of sort of how we believe perception works, because that put it into the mindset of production rather than just Freudian style of this is what we're born with. You're like this. This is the human condition. Blah, blah, blah. This is savage. Blah, 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 all that shit. This is much more, hey, actually, as you go through life and you have these experiences, this was Lacan's idea. You go through the mirror stage. In that moment, you have the break with the real and the imaginary becomes a thing. And then at some point, you realize the Oedipal complex is real, and you get, like, over time, as you develop these things, you produce lack. And that's when Deleuze went, oh, well, what if not just lack you produce? What if we're just producing desire all the time? And so he just kind of flipped it. Instead of producing lack, it's this positive force, this life-affirming passion, libido, and we're not producing lack, we're producing that positive force. It's kind of a flip of that. Even though it seems like it's not super connected, really it feels like it's directly inspired, to me at least.
So then maybe to bring it back to what we were talking about with Lou and the virtual, I think I'm wrong about this, but it seems like this whole like great other and signifiers sounds really virtual. It sounds like they're talking about a sort of like a virtual plane, especially the word signifier, which to me, it's like a 100% reaching towards that kind of reality. But maybe I'm wrong.
This is going to be a semantics thing, and we should probably try to figure out other terms to use for this, because I think we may be stuck in a semantics thing. And I mean, I'm saying that because, for example, the signifier is something that's not real. But I would argue, and Roger, back me up here if I'm right, Deleuze would almost argue that it becomes real in the sense that at some point you integrate that into your unconscious, because those signifiers are the molar investments that end up sort of embedding themselves as lack within your desiring machines, which is what this chapter was kind of going over.
Well, I mean, the signifier is always real. Like everything is real. If it composes a series, at one point it's becoming real. Though the signifier is not into the actual, it would be into the virtual, because
Yes.
it's into the structure of semiotics, and but it can be actualized, though. It can be actualized through different processes.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see.
But let's take Lacan's master signifier as a very specific thing that actually I'm going to try to find this section. We're not far off from these moments that they actually just talked about all of them. While I'm doing that, someone else should probably respond so I can mute myself and you're not hearing me click away.
It's tough because I feel like I'm missing some of the background for virtuality. Like, I haven't read Bergson, so I don't know that, and I haven't read any of Deleuze's stuff about what he specifically would call virtual and not. So I think
the structuralism essay.
I will. All right, bet.
I'm saying that's the one where Deleuze lays it out. I feel his whole analysis of what is structuralism and what do we call structures, and it's a masterclass, and I always quote it. I think they're quoting it in the chat as well. But sorry guys, I came late, so don't listen to me.
Welcome. We're happy to have you here. Did you change your mic? You sound different.
I'm in my professional studio setup.
You sound so suave.
So what prompted the virtual thing exactly?
I think literally the question about what is the virtual. And then Lou decided to ask me a question, and I'm sitting here, not enough coffee, and then I get down the road, and then he pulled the rug out from under me, and now we're on some of Lou.
Hey, I did nothing wrong. I just wanted to talk about Bergson.
Hashtag Lou did nothing wrong.
No, I think I asked because Brooks talked a few times about how he basically thinks the subject exists in the virtual, and I couldn't really square that with my understanding of the virtual or the subject, so we just went off from my comment on that.
But I think what we're doing is we're switching from one system of thought to the other, right? Maybe there's I don't know Freud that much, and I don't know Lacan that much, but I don't think they respond to the same axioms, in the sense that those models, for example, we're just considering the real. Depend if you write the real with a big R or small r. Lacanian, the real is opposed to the symbolic, but in Deleuzian thought, the real is not this opposition.
So to rein it back in around the virtual, I have a question that's kind of with presenting a sort of contemplative thing that I was thinking about today. If a schiz is synonymous with, let's say a a gate opening up in terms of circuits, or a cut in the Lacanian speak, where there is an opening to a different flow, like a displacement. If the schiz causes a kind of displacement, I was thinking about, is the virtual then what arises within the subject's movement through the flow? Is there the subject moving through the flow that opens up from the schiz? Is that a virtual?
The movement, no, the movement is the actual configuration and reconfiguration. What is virtual, for example, is what is being deposited in the past of this action. As you're going, if you move, like, your question is really general, but like, if you're somebody that moves on the street, you're walking on the street, so you're actualizing different movements, with your legs, with your arms, keeping balance and all of this. But the result of this action is being recast into the virtual as a form of memory or as a form of habit. The habit becomes the template of your next move. So this learning phase, or those feedback loops, are passing stuff from the actual to the virtual and then back to the actual.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking.
This is a more like Bergsonian understanding of like how time evolves, but I think like some of Deleuze like took hints of that also. But I think you're right. I think the intuition you had there, intuition for Bergson, but the intuition you had there is right. But it's just like we need to be careful into like just cutting at the right place what belongs to the actual and what belongs to the virtual. And both movements are really real. You're walking on the street, this is real, but the habits of you walking, of learning to walk, learning to keep your balance, knowing your way around into the city, it deposits itself back into memory and into temporal blocks, for example. It becomes like a part of the past, but the past is still acting or still being potentially acting by being into the virtual.
But also like the virtual structures of things, I feel like it can get really complicated to think about. But like, I think it also applies to, if you even just think about what Marx was trying to do when he was discovering the abstract subjective essence of labor and stuff, or you think about economics or something, or plotting a chart of what's happening in the stock market or GDP or all these things. Like, you could argue that different ways of us understanding these things are wrong or incorrect, or they're not granular enough, or they're inconsistent, whatever. But on some level, when you plot points on a graph and then you put connections between those points, it's a bit too simplistic to just say, well, that isn't real, that doesn't exist. Because I think what writers like Deleuze and others are trying to say with the virtual is like, and with that essay on structuralism, is like, there is a kind of structure in the what is it's real without being actual. You don't see it in the same way that you see a glass that is right in front of you that you can hold and touch. But if you map out these points, you can affect it, you can change it, and it has real effects in the world. So to say that it's not real, it's like there's a virtuality to it that exists that we just have to kind of approach, maybe in the Bergsonian sense, in an intuitive sense. There's other ways of doing it, but that like there's a virtuality to like the capitalist system, or to any institution, or to our own subjectivity, or chains of flows that can be mapped out. And again, you could be more or less accurate, but they're not real. Like, the map isn't just this piece of paper that you're looking at. There's a kind of like being, and we are in that metastable state at various levels.
This we totally agree, and that's what we concluded earlier, just before you came. The virtual is very real. And that's the difference between the Lacanian understanding that puts the real onto one side and the symbolic onto the other side. For Deleuze, it's the virtual and the actual are still real, as they come into series. For capitalism, we're talking about the master signifier in I think it was in Lacan, so it's the phallus. But in capitalism, it would be the capital. So the model of the capital it's into the virtual. The diagram of it all is into the virtual. And when you're saying that you're looking at a graph and you're looking at those bear or bull tendencies, I don't know much about this, but this is what I know. And you're trying to see where the points or the line of the graph is going to go. By using the models that has been learned that are into the virtual, you actualize them into a graph. But this actualization into a graph allows for more potential to be actualized, in the sense that you will arrange your action according to this mapping that you've done. So this planning becomes really actual and really real, in the sense that it affects the way we are into the world. So basically, it's the same with Oedipus. If you spend enough time on the couch and they're saying it's the fault of your daddy, well, you will believe it's the fault of your daddy, and you will act accordingly. You will change your representation, change your ideas, change your ways, or not, but still have this fault, and this problem and this slack that they are trying to get into your head, which is never there. But if you believe that it's there, it starts to act. Same thing with Santa Claus, same thing with God. Maybe they're not real existing entities, but because they exist into the virtual, they can have actual consequences. And same thing for the map. The moment you map something, you will read the reality in the form of the map. So the map actually is a model. It's a virtual model that gives you potential usage of the territory.
Okay, I've got to jump in just really quick, because because Lou kept asking things that are, and I've gotten stuck on trying to figure out how to answer Lou the original question, even while you're going through all this. One of the things that has come up even again in this section is his readings of Proust. And I went back and found, and there's a lot of essays he's written on Proust in general, but he does talk about In Search of Lost Time in this book, I think even in the section. And he does place the narrator, and he talks about it as though we are subject at the mercy of the signs and symbols of the world, that the pre-conscious informs us of these things, that our subject exists just prior to sort of how we directly interact. It's how they talk about Proust, for sure. Super early in the book, they go through this. I want to say page 68. Read some of that. Sorry, this text recognition on this is terrible. 68. In this regard, it is possible that Charlot's coarse admonition is prophetic. A lot we care about our old grandmother, you little shit. For what does in fact take place in Search of Lost Time, one and the same story with infinite variations? It is clear the narrator sees nothing, hears nothing, that he is a body without organs, or like a spider poisoned in the web, observing nothing, but responding to the slightest sign, the slightest vibration by springing on its prey. Everything begins with nebula, statistical holes whose outlines are blurred, molar or collective formations comprising singularities distributed haphazardly. Living room, group of girls, a landscape. Then, within these nebulae, or these collectives, sides take shape, series are arranged. Persons figure in these series under strange laws of lack, absence, asymmetry, exclusion, non-communication, vice, and guilt. Next, everything becomes blurred again, everything comes apart, but this time in a molecular and pure multiplicity, where the partial objects, boxes, vessels, all have positive determination, and enter into aberrant communication following a transversal that runs through the whole work. An immense flow that each partial object produces and again reproduces and cuts at the same time. More than vice, says Proust, it is madness and its innocence that disturbs us. Schizophrenia is the universal. The great artist is indeed the one who scales the schizophrenic wall and reaches the land of the unknown, where he no longer belongs to any time, milieu, or school. The entire paragraph is basically him poetically taking the narrator's sort of journey through the three syntheses. Is how I read that. And it's how I read that then, but now I have a much better grasp of that. And so when they say everything becomes blurred again and the narrator sees these things happen, that's where the subject comes in. That's the subject, at least as I read it. Did I go on too long of a tangent?
You're all right.
All right.
No, that was good. Can you post the page reference there?
Yes. I'll copy over the much as I can. This text, I do not.
Yeah, you know, something that I was thinking though, again, and I try to see how this theory stuff affects me and has an impact on me, is that the complexity and the excessiveness of anti-Oedipus that's working through my subjectivity, I think, has a lot to do with this virtual actual access. So, you know, sometimes I'll have a moment where I'm just like, wait a second, isn't this anti-Oedipus kind of working in an ad hoc way? Like it's summarizing all the things that I'm actually already experiencing and doing. Am I already, always and already, given the, you know, the structure of the ether of the demands of the economic world, functioning as an anti-Oedipus to a certain extent? And then by looping back into the theory, which is virtual, you know, my subjectivity then has to deal with the schiz away from the virtual back into the actual, and then there's this kind of dialectic that's happening there.
I would just say one thing: the anti-Oedipus is not a structure or a model. It's actually the criticism of the political ecology, political economy of psychoanalysis, in the sense that, you know, it contests this model of a lack. So the anti-Oedipus is a way to deconstruct this so something else can arise. But there's no prescriptive or, you know, expected outcome into applying or thinking into the way that anti-Oedipus is.
Right, but as the critique of the Oedipus, which is like what was mentioned earlier, a snag in one not really understanding the demands of the situated perspective well, and getting into like a sort of a confusion and a fog around the subject. The anti-Oedipus is kind of there to inject, but it's excessive in its complexity, and then somehow, you know, as the side effects fall away, or one tarries through, there's quite a bit of negative, I wouldn't say theology, but the negative sort of aspect of continental philosophy to then kind of brush off and, you know, understand the function of actualizing the virtual.
I think we've got to be really careful here. Like Roger's saying, it's not like they create an anti-Oedipus to oppose Oedipus any more than Nietzsche creates like an anti-Christ to oppose Christ. Like when they're talking about anti-Oedipus, like they're talking about like de-Oedipalizing and like the syllogisms versus the paralogisms on that.
Yeah, to quote the book, how they talk about Oedipus is, we are so molded by Oedipus that we find it hard to imagine another use, and even the three familial neuroses do not escape this use. It becomes nevertheless apparent that schizophrenia teaches us a singular extra Oedipal lesson and reveals to us an unknown force, the disjunctive synthesis, an imminent use. They go through, the intention here is that Oedipus is this idea, concept that, as damaging as it is, actually makes everything else sort of form. Think of it like, I think of it like Ice Nine. Thanks to Jack, I recently reread Cat's Cradle. The idea of Ice Nine is it's the subject, you drop it in water, any water becomes instantly ice. Now, it's actually kind of a fairly realistic theoretical thing because that's how crystalline structures are created. So you have this idea that upon entering, turns everything else Oedipal. And it's because of how Oedipus teaches itself, because what it does is it basically, and they go over this, the Oedipal triangle informs the father. The son is sort of born with this original sin, and the son is the one who gives him this Oedipal complex. I am jealous of my son because He's spending more time with my wife. He's sucking on her tit. He's doing these things with her. He wants her. He wants to fuck her. He wants to kill me. I have Oedipal hate of my son. This kind of thing that is visited on me, but I'm taught that it's my son who's doing it to me, when it's not. That's not reality. Me doing it to actually him. But because we have that sort of thing inserted in us as an idea that actually, no, you wanted to fuck your own mom too and kill your dad. It's like, oh shit, I did. And then suddenly we have this cyclical sort of self-replicating idea that is Oedipus. They're saying, no, the first task of schizoanalysis, and that's trying to bring us back to this section. The first task is actually to go into and figure out where the desiring machines are connected and what is being replaced at that first stage. Because we have the 3 syntheses, and we have the...
I don't think you did.
Okay. Sorry, sometimes I get distracted.
But see, that's a line of flight that is part of that project, to go back into that narrative and thread it back through, loop it through, and so it's in the investment then goes back through language, and I think this text tries to create a schiz, away from that.
Maybe. I mean, it's developing a whole methodology in that. Like, I don't think they're trying to do Lacanianism, if that made sense, any more than they're trying to do psychoanalysis. They're talking about, in many ways, like what psychoanalysis has the potential to be, but there's a problem with psychoanalysis. There's a lot of problems with psychoanalysis, one of which is that the use of the Oedipus complex, and in this sense, like, it's not just the Oedipus complex. They're very clear that the same thing can be done with Hamlet, in that the way that this function of power, if I can be a little Foucauldian for a moment, the way that this works as a function of power is to reduce the social to the familial, and the familial to this sort of stage play in a representation of how one interacts with authority and like desire, and this way that there's just like a sense of castration in that. Right, like there's this problem of, instead of talking about deprivation or like how things are blocked and unable to connect, we instead will paralogistically take it for granted that things are absent. To be sort of banal about it, it's about missing the forest for the trees in this model, because we're dealing with representations, and more concretely representations of representations, which is also problematic because that affects how we understand the unconscious. So like, especially like with like the depersonalization, like we were saying earlier, like if with the unconscious as factory and as a passive series of syntheses, that move alone is already very different, because like that's not your id and your ego having a conflict with one another that produces anxiety or narcissism, or like where they say earlier on, actually, it's not a problem of the neurotic or the psychotic whose ego is fighting with the id. Like, that's not how they're understanding desire and how that has a relationship with the social and with production, with the unconscious as a productive force.
Right. So that was really clear, Jack. I appreciate that, and yeah, I'm beginning to see things in that way. So I appreciate the clarification there.
If we want to go on to this just a little bit more, I don't know where it is into the English text, but they're referring to psychiatrists Pankow and Bethel M. It's like in the 150 page in French. But what they're saying is that what they were trying to do into this non-Oedipalizing process of treating patients was to lead patients into recognizing desire and this unconscious desire. But the recognition was not a way to find a fulfillment. It was to question it. If you recognize it, you say, oh, it's there. So what do we do with it, or how could we do otherwise? So this whole process with what was not going back into childhood to try to fix something, but to actually experience new things, experience new sensation, because it's all linked to perception. You need to perceive things for them to enter your psyche. It was doing new activities, having corporal or bodily sensation, something that would be tactile or perceptual. So this is the whole difference. Instead of going back to the Oedipus and fixing the subject, is to go in the world and connect differently. That would be the key of the anti-Oedipus prescription, I think.
Yeah, and to remove blockages.
Yes.
Plumber, they call it mechanics, but you're more of a plumber.
I use the example, I think, on one of our images of the Robert De Niro character from Brazil as kind of what a schizoanalyst really is. Fixes the AC. If you haven't seen Brazil, you need to. But that's...
Totally. Yeah, totally. I think you're totally right. I gave this example as plumbing because, I have like open plumbing in my basement. And I was like, I have to do stuff in the basement. And I was looking at it. I was like, this is a really good metaphor for the whole thing. But I think this is how we need to think of it. The flux is being the water, and there's blockage on the side because, the pipes are organizing the flux. But there would be blockage within the pipes that will reorganize the water into a certain way, de-intensify it or re-intensify it in certain ways. But if we remove the blockage or we open a valve, we reconfigure, we displace the intensities. So, there's a whole becoming to this machine of water going through pipes, and it's always ongoing. So, if we open ways, we allow becoming to happen.
Yes, I think that's really well said, because this is why it's a really important distinction that the unconscious here is passive and that these syntheses are passive. It's not like we actually have to try to do these syntheses. The unconscious in this is happening around us, and we're produced in that process, right? In the same way, the wasp isn't actually the wasp per se. It's really a series of collections of different machines and their interconnections and their breaks with one another. And that simultaneity allows for the possibility of what we call the wasp.
And at any point, the whole point, and this is, I think, Logic of Sense delves really deep into this, but specifically about the wasp and the orchid and what they are at any given moment. When the wasp is just flying around, it's becoming a wasp. When the wasp lands on the orchid, it's actually becoming orchid. In those moments, its desiring machines are trying to connect it with what is actually an organ, whereas the orchid, at that point, has its desiring machines that are seeking out in the world, but they're becoming wasp. And so in that moment, they're actually becoming each other, sort of in those experiences. And the desiring machines are the things pushing them towards doing that and towards us doing this. It's the first task of schizoanalysis. This entire thing is for us to actually go in and understand what machines are working, what that larger system is, and destroying the pieces, literally destroying the pieces that are doing harm to that passive process. Because this is why, to go back to that original question Lou asked, is where I see the virtual and where I see the subject. This is that. It's passive sort of integrations of things, the way that they interact, the way that all of these syntheses fire off and then ultimately connect to the social machines. That's where we are created. That's where I exist. And if we can actually break connections, break how those connections are formed and what machines are making them, that's where we can actually improve people's lives.
So there's two things here. You're talking about connection between the wasp and the orchid, and they're becoming one another as they are connecting. But this has temporal effects as well. So this becoming orchid of the wasp, it keeps going after the connection. If there's a disjunction there, there's still like a becoming other that keeps going, because the experience is being recast into the virtual of the bee, and it keeps on actualizing. So it becomes part of the productive machine of the bee or the wasp. But that's the same thing with humans. If you experience something, it will be cast back into your memory or your past as a temporal block, and it will keep acting on your actual experiences. So to actually change this is not to play into the virtual, but to play into the actual. Get yourself into the gym, stop drinking, and because you do this, you allow yourself to learn that an active body is better than a passive one, that maybe not being drunk all the time is better than being drunk all the time. So this having new experiences allow you to become other, and they keep playing in time, and because they actually function as habit creating, because of the repetition that you're doing them, they will feed back into this loop constantly. So that's one way of fixing the subject, instead of trying to fix the symbolic of the pipes. You just you just change the pipes.
Yeah, to that point, like to put it in kind of like anti-Oedipus terms, right? Like with the wasp and orchid, right? It's not simply that the wasp itself is becoming orchid. That's not necessarily wrong, but it's all these different desiring machines are engaging with this the production and the disjunctions, like you're saying, and that subjectivity is consummated by these desiring machines in connection with the body without organs, right? Because in Anti-Oedipus, they seem to I only recall like one instance of the use of the term the virtual, which is in the page 128 to 129. I might be splitting hairs here, but I don't disagree with Roger on that point. I only mean to say that it's not more so than it being recorded in the virtual. It's directly recorded in these body without organs.
Oh, I didn't look at the chat. Oh, I'm being called Jordan now. All right. There's the mythos, and
You said get up and clean your room and.
Oh, okay, I get it. But that's the thing, like if you take Jordan Peterson, that's the thing. He's actually telling you to change your ways into the. Well, I don't agree with that guy. I would fight him, but he's telling you to change the actual structure of your day. By changing the actual structure, you will modify your habits and you will become something else. And he's like, he's giving you like a map, or to become productive, to become part of the system, to become successful within capitalism. That's basically what he does. But it's fixing people, it's actually doing that too. So it's not there's two possible. Either you open possibilities to fuck the system or change it, or produce something new, or you fix the condition of the subject so it can actually atone itself to what is being already there. And I mean, we cannot create revolutionaries out of everyone. This is not what everyone wants. So it's really, for when you come from like an anarchist background, it's really difficult to understand the practice of psychiatry and the practice of therapy, because you see the therapist as like mind police. I cannot see them otherwise. So I have this really difficult way of understanding what can be produced by therapy other than some kind of a prison for the mind or a prison for the body, but you actually are the plumber of your own prison.
To a point, yes. Only to add on to that is to say, I don't necessarily disagree with you, but to add on to that is also the matter of like how things are connected with the social and that. So like there are things you can change in your life, right? That yeah, you can clean your room and that, but there's also right, like going to work and that. There's ways that the unconscious is happening, say in the institution of, I don't know where plumbers work. I don't even know if they have offices. They probably home
They're
office.
people. There are millions of them, and they're just like us, Jack.
I know. I'm being rude to the plumbers. Let me take construction. there's an unconscious that comes with the office of the construction workplace. And there's a way in which all that is not only set up, but will be I gotta be careful when I use the word active here, that throughout the day in that connections are made, and there's a way in which that we all enter into that with each other, and that these different partial objects are entering into that with us, right? And so I suspect too, like, and this is to, I think, affirm Roger's point, part of this kind of change comes into play with also changing. It's kind of wherever you go, you have the potentiality for changing these things, both in terms of yourself, perhaps, but also in terms of like groups.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here and push us onto another subject, unless anyone has any last thoughts on that one, because I have actual stuff I want to get through, and we've gone an hour now, and I think it's been more general good, but I'd like to push ahead because I have a hand.
I do have one last thing in terms of like the discussion of the virtual and that. This is the one paragraph that I recall them using the word virtual, and it actually gets into a paralogism and into the use of Oedipus, so it might be...
Go for it.
It does relate to what we're going to talk about in terms of the first positive task. So page 128 to 129, we maintain that the cause of the disorder, neurosis or psychosis, is always in desiring production, in its relation to social production, in their different or conflicting regimes, and the modes of investment that desiring production performs in the system of social production. The actual factor is desiring production, insofar as it is caught up in this relationship, this conflict, and these modalities. Nor is this factor either ulterior or privative. Being constitutive of the full life of desire, it is contemporary with the most tender age, and it accomplishes the life with every step. It does not arise after Oedipus. It in no way presupposes an Oedipal organization, nor a pre-Oedipal pre-organization. On the contrary, it is Oedipus that depends on desiring production, either as a stimulus of one form or another, a simple indicator through which the Oedipal organization of desiring production is formed, beginning with early childhood, or as an effect of the psychic and social repression imposed on desiring production by social reproduction by means of the family. The term actual is not used because it designates what is most recent, and because it would be opposed to former or infantile. It is used in terms of its difference with respect to virtual, and it is the Oedipus complex that is virtual, either inasmuch as it must be actualized in an erotic formation as a derived effect of the actual factor, or inasmuch as it is dismembered and dissolved in a psychotic formation as the direct effect of this same factor. It is indeed in this sense that the idea of the afterward seemed to us to be a final paralogism in psychoanalytic theory and practice. Active desiring production in its very process invests from the beginning a constellation of somatic, social, and metaphysical relations that do not follow after Oedipal psychological relations, but that on the contrary will be applied. This was kind of Roger's point earlier, that will be applied to the underlying Oedipal constellation defined by reaction, or else will exclude this constellation from the field of investment constituting their activity. Undecidable, virtual, reactive or rational, such as Oedipus. It is only a reactional formation, a formation that results from a reaction to desiring production. It is a serious mistake to consider this formation in isolation, abstractly, independently of the actual factor that coexists with it and to which it reacts. So at one level, this is part of Roger's point about Oedipus's application, right? It's something that you're applying, but it's also something that in the connections with you and the psychotherapist and that, and like the social, is being applied therein. But more to the point too, like Oedipus, we talk about it as though it exists outside of all these socialities, all these different connections. But their point is Oedipus is both has been produced by desiring production, but also, when applied, acts upon desiring production. Oedipus is a reaction to desiring production, and that way, as an application upon desiring production, doesn't simply stymie you or me as anxious, neurotic, or psychotic, but actually works to stymie the unconscious in this more, shall we say, microphysical sense, that the sense of the molecular. Those things such as anxiety and that we typically have in the Freudian and Lacanian psychoanalytic discourse. Their point here is not to say that it simply stymies you or me. That actually affects the desiring production of these desiring machines and how these assemblages are possible. It's a huge critique into psychoanalytic methods of praxis and application, and what it does not only to you as a person, but to the unconscious in this more general sense, shall we say.
All right. I'd like to dive into one of the things within this section we're supposed to be reviewing. The molecular chain. I reread this section last night, and I want to read just a little bit and talk about my understanding of the signifying chain as I understood it from kind of where I thought they were coming from, which was Lacan, sort of World of Critical, page 328 of the text. It's dead in the middle. But it is another case altogether with the properly molecular chain. Insofar as the BWO is a non-specific and non-specified support that marks the molecular limit of the molar aggregates, the chain no longer has any other function than that of deterritorializing the flows and causing them to pass through the signifying wall, thereby undoing codes. The function of the chain is no longer that of coding of flows on the full body of Earth, the despot or capital, but on the contrary, that of decoding them on the full body without organs. The chain of escape, no longer a code. The signifying chain has become a chain of decoding and deterritorialization, which only be apprehended as the reverse of the codes and the territorialities. Now, I'll actually dive in to this directly. Signifying chains, Lacanian concept. It's a combination of signifiers underneath a massive master signifier that connect in a ton of different ways, generally only understood by the subject perceiving them, and think of it as, I think I saw a good version of that is links in a necklace. They are intertwined. Now, the necklace itself is a bunch of different chains. I see them as intertwined and interconnected. That is signifying chain concept. Now, the properly molecular chain, they talk about basically being, this is where I fall apart. So if this is my signifying chain, I have all of these different symbols that are interconnected and signifiers that are sort of chained underneath a master signifier. Boom, idea. Deleuze and Guattari toss that out. There is no such thing as a master signifier. Not how it really works. Instead, what we have these molar chains that exist, and their job is blank. That's it. That's all I got. And it's kind of a problem for me.
So first, the master signifier is paralogistic.
Correct.
That's like the thing we just read about Oedipus, right? The way that can be, the way that is worked upon desire is paralogistic. It's not to say it's not to negate it. It's to say that it's paralogistic. It's a misuse of the syntheses.
It's if the syntheses are broken, then out comes the master, or vice versa.
Or to subvert them.
Right. So then, okay, the chain no longer has any other function than that of deterritorializing the flows and causing them to pass through the signifying wall, undoing the codes. Please describe this to me in a way I can understand.
Tall order.
Page 282.
One sec. Was that Muskie? Please, Muskie.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like I'm having a hard time explaining it, but they're sort of doing that movement from the like these big social structures, the molar conditions that condition desire, and then when they talk about breaking through the signifying wall and the molecular chain, that's them switching down to like the individual schizophrenic way of like interacting with desire. So I'm not sure where exactly the confusion is so that I could try to help.
Okay, so the previous paragraph ends with, the very notions of code and axiomatic therefore seem to be valid only for molar aggregates, where the signifying chain forms a given determinate configuration on support that is itself specifically determined and in terms of a detached signifier. This is the concept of the paralogism that ends up working at a molar level, molar investments that suck and fuck us up. Now, different though, with a properly molecular chain on this side, on the pre-individual level, the molecular chain, insofar as the body without organs is non-specific and non-specified support that marks the molecular limit of the molar aggregates. They can't get closer than this. They can't be broken down anymore until they become molecular. That chain, that molecular chain, has no function other than deterritorializing the flows and causing them to pass through the signifying wall, undoing the codes. That last part, I don't get. I need an example. I need an example of it.
I mean, it still has function. It's just that the signs just have no signification in the sense that, they're not necessarily linked to the molar significance, but they are having effects and they are having functions.
Okay.
Maybe this is a bad example, but like maybe something like a piece of like abstract art, like a Rothko or like a Pollock, where that is someone's desire kind of actualized in their painting, but you can't say that like a Rothko signifies any one thing particularly. It's kind of a color or a wash, something like that.
Yeah, or we could take. It's difficult for me to like start from art, so I'm trying to consider your example, but I'm going to give like a common a layman example.
Let me try, because would an example be a dollar? The discussion at the molar level about dollars and how the economy works and who has what money, but literally when I'm just holding the dollar and I'm dealing with it myself at a molecular level, it's effectively meaningless.
Sure, you could. That one I feel like is a little tough because there's a lot of politics and economics implicated in money, but yeah, you could make the money into anything. You could light the dollar on fire and use it to light a cigar, and that's not really like a signifying thing. It's hard to say that means anything.
Yeah, but just the function exchange, the exchange function of the dollar, as I'm buying pot from you. So like I'm never going to buy pot from you, but I'm giving you $1 for like X amount of pot. It's actually it's producing reality. It inscribes itself into a chain without necessarily being into the whole capitalistic kind of pattern, because 1 gram is amount to X dollars, and we make this equivalence, and it doesn't have to go with the surplus value and stuff like this. It can become like a purely exchange form, and I think that at the level of people, these change of exchange create series that are actually, because they are reproducing themselves enough, become part of the molar, or are reproductions of the molar. But you can exchange whatever. You can pay for new things that you would have never paid of.
Well, so I'm more trying to figure out, because I think I'm able to start getting more specific about what my question is. We're talking about molar and molecular, the molar aggregate and the molecular chain, the molecular moments and the way desiring machines work. At the molecular level, molecular is pre-subject, pre-individual. And so at that point, we're talking about basically breaking down what things work at a material level. The interconnectedness of these things doesn't really exist at that point. The dollar, for example, is paper with maybe a certain feel screen. I don't have a use for that. There is no larger thing that exists in the molecular chain that would do that. It's completely decoded. However, on the other side of the wall, which becomes the molar aggregates, those flows actually have a use. Those flows are things and stories that I become invested in, my molar investments, and it passion, social machines, and all of those things are examples of that. They're human machines, the social machines, however you want to put it. But money would be that. It becomes useful at a social level. And the stories I tell myself become how the body without organs functions. That's the body without organs. It's the story, the meta that I exist in. But that only exists on the other side of things. The question for me is where it says the function of the chain is no longer that of coding the flows on the full body of the earth, despot, or capital, but on contrary, that of decoding them on the full body without organs. I get the beginning of that, because the chain ultimately codes flows on the full body of the earth. I get that switch and that change over time, but on the contrary, it decodes them on the full body. I don't understand what that process is or how that has any relevance or what it is. I don't understand that at all, I guess.
So I think part of what's happening is that the body without organs is kind of a molecular thing, right? They call it the giant molecule. It doesn't exist only on the side of, the molar aggregates. It's part of what makes desiring machines. It's the part of the like simultaneous conditions that they talk about for their unconscious to exist. It's the recording and the anti-production that goes into making the network of desiring machines possible. Does that help?
Yeah, well, that's the same thing we were discussing the other day. The molecular is possible because the molar is there. There's always this relationship that is being, because the molar is the driving point. It's the like you said, it's the motor, and the molecular are attached to the molar in some way, but they can actually point to other possibles. As the molar doesn't point to possible itself, it's something that is static. It's something that does not move, but that produces conditions for rising possibilities.
To jump in here, like the reason I bring up 282 is I think once again that's what they're describing is the way that like if you follow social production, right, like there's a way in which it's conditioned by the body of the earth, the despotic body, and the body of capital money. But there's also there's both. So this is their point about delirium here. That social production moves from the paranoiac and the schizophrenic, right? So they have like the dotted lines are supposed to be like schizophrenic deterritorializings and decodings, yeah. So like there's a way in which these different socii, if I can try and make it plural out of a singular neologism, there's a way in which these are conditioning desiring production here. When desiring production moves to the body without organs, which is the tangential limit for social production, right? It has the ability to either move through and be a part of the schizophrenic process of deterritorialization. And I would argue too, like decoding here, which is what that passage is talking about, is when the signifying chain is decoded and deterritorialized, or it can bounce back and be repulsed by the body without organs, right? It can be right back into the body of capital money as Oedipal neuroses, as familial entities, the despotic body as paranoia and psychoses as despotic entities, or the body of the earth with perversions as territorial entities. So like what this means is like one, this has really important, this is kind of what we were talking about in chat yesterday about like art and that, like these things are social production, desiring production are going to be conditioned by the associacies. There's a way in which they have a relationship with them. And as that approaches the body without organs, right, it's having passed through capital in that sense and the other two. It doesn't exist in negation of them, in lieu of them, any more than Oedipus would. What happens, though, and so this is not a point about co-opting as we usually talk about it, what seems to happen to me is that there's a way in which that attachment with the body without organs here can allow for a pass through. And this is where they're talking about like the line of escape, where these things are, like they say, it's like taken with them, deterritorialized and decoded. And that remains with the body without organs. And this is kind of what Roger's getting at with like the potentialities and the possibilities of new connections in that. It's a deterritorializing or and decoding of desire so as to allow for that, having had that desire already be conditioned.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the big criticism of Deleuze as a capitalist thinker. And there's a lot of people who actually said that, because capitalism in that way is a decoding or a deterritorializing machine that actually allows for other possibilities to arise. So it's not being criticized from the get-go as from a Marxist perspective, but it's saying that it creates new possibilities by harnessing potentialities into a different manner.
Correct. And this is really important because unlike Marxism, he's not going to negate capitalism. He's going to, right, this is this is affirmative of it. This doesn't make capitalism a positive or like a good or benevolent force. It is simply like recognizing it instead of negating it and like moving toward its antithesis. Mm-hmm. I'm convincing Hegel here, moving toward its antithesis.
Yeah, and on this point, I think it's the 18 Brumaire of Napoleon, in which Marx is pointing toward the idea of accelerationism. If we push capitalism to its limit, it's going to break down, and it's going to, allow for other possibilities. And this is why a lot of accelerationists are tapping into Deleuze, because he's saying basically the same thing. But the Marxists in general didn't take that part of Marx. They were just saying, "Oh, we need to fight capitalism, and capitalism is bad," and they made capitalism into the phallic master signifier, and then they're trying to fix political economy by into the same manner that the psychoanalysis would do, but to take account that capitalism is productive of alternatives. Creates like a different kind of understanding of political economy.
Precisely, because that means like, this is controversial, like you're saying, but that means something like co-opting in the sense of like, I used punk rock yesterday, like that happens with capital, under capital, and in relation to capital, but that doesn't make it like that doesn't in and of itself make it good or bad. The place for judgment here is how that interacts with the body without organs, and whether it gets repulsed back onto capital, the despotic, or the body or the body of the earth, which I think it tends to be something like the body of the earth, or if it breaks through. Because the thing about capital is it's decoding and deterritorializing, but with the other hand, it's using overcoding, right? Like this is like what makes it so challenging. Capital's got it's not like we're dealing with coding or overcoding. We're dealing with the simultaneity of overcoding and decoding, right? We've got the state and the use of the earth stat and capital, and the simultaneity.
So this is we're getting at here the way that these molar aggregates condition desire, right? Which plays into the original question, because they're talking precisely about the kind of desire that breaks out of that conditioning.
Sociaces or socii, but yes, because like even in Roger's pod example, right? Like money there is a socius if we're talking about capitalism, which I think technically we are there. Like there's a conditionality there of social production.
Yeah. Okay. And that's and that's one way of using money. But another way of using money might be to burn it, or to fold it into a hat, or to eat it if you're desperate.
Yeah, but it's not money. This is pure material as paper.
Right.
Well, that's if we want to talk about
distinction matters. Go ahead, Brooks.
Yeah, that's if we want to talk about, again, the entire conception of this book is to bring a materialist perspective to psychoanalysis. And so, again, I think it's a way that they've done that very deftly, and all of this comes back to that same thing where once we're at the molecular level and we're breaking things down, removing molar investments, removing the molar aggregate, just having that discussion with an Alisand or with a subject or with Roger or with Brooks about how they think about a thing or what they're working them through and talking through until you're at the point where you're dealing more with the molecular than the molar, is when you're able to start actually understanding how things work at a material level. And that's, I think, the sort of big underlying push that they've done here.
Mm-hmm. So, if you want a concrete example of this, we can have the city or disability as ideas or sets of representation, but that's quite different from and joining with people with disabilities and actually see how they exist in the city and how they connect to, the mobility infrastructure. This is a complete different way of doing social research. But also that would be the same thing in psychoanalysis or, anything that is linked to the psychology or psychiatry, instead of, playing into the symbolic, into the representation of it, is to follow people during their day and, say, oh, yeah, so you're doing this as a pattern. Why don't we try something else? And it's something I was doing with people with disabilities, and it's really disruptive. We're creating new possibilities arise. And that's a way of, making, transforming the corrective aspect of social or psychological intervention into, you're being a door opener. You open doors. You just open a door and you say, okay, let's try this one. And because it gives a different experience of in reality, it actually transforms, the series of the molecular connections.
Yeah, I think you're definitely onto it with that, because the reason I'm saying it's not co-opting and that too is it's getting into codification and territorialization, right? There's a way in which what you're talking about in your disability studies, you're not just changing people per se, you're changing the territorialities, or the territory for the desiring machines and the way that that's going to interact with the body without organs, right? You're changing the codifications there.
But it's not me that is changing it, it's me coupled with somebody, and they are opening their own doors. I'm just suggesting into that thing. I don't have any credit to take of changing the territoriality, but in the manner that the person will say, oh, there's alternatives, I can do something else. So the strategy into the territory changes. And because the strategy changes, the cartography of the habit or the form of dwelling that the person has changes. So the territory changes. So you're producing alternative worlds. And that's really the kind of language that I use. It's, we're into different ontologies with the S, but we need to open those ontologies. But they're not something that we plan in advance. It's something that we do as we go. So this is a different understanding of mobility, different understanding of dwelling. But I think there's a lot of, I would not have written my own dissertation if I didn't think that there was a potential there to be tapped into. But I tried to follow the suggestion of Deleuze and Guattari as much as I could, into that kind of social project. But this is the projection.
I would say that it's a really good way to go about talking about what they're talking about when they say sort of the machinic unconscious, how it operates, desiring machines versus the molar aggregates, and how a schizoanalyst should operate. I would go even a step further, and it's a lot more abstract and difficult, but I'm sure you have something in your something you could talk about in the realm of there are buildings that people naturally don't feel comfortable going inside, which sounds stupid when I say it out loud. They're buildings. You're supposed to go into them. That is what they are for. But the design of some of them, how the doors are set up, how the crown molding is done. Is the door heavy and swings outward rather than slides in? All of these little things they're not things that a person even necessarily recognizes. Disabled people, I would say, even more so, because they're taught they don't belong in a number of different spaces. So you take these things and you integrate them. And what happens is you have these broken moments of your desiring machines as you're taking in a million bits of stimulus. And in those moments, again, to go back to where the subject is created, right before a thing becomes molar, when you realize, oh, that I'm not supposed to go in that building. Now, why? But I could give you 30 million reasons. But suddenly that person isn't trying to. And then what happens, and it's one of those really fascinating things, these desire pathways, what we're talking about with this is the same problem that, people are talking about when they talk about e-commerce sites and people leaving stuff in their bag, or how do you deal with the intentionality in people changing their minds or affecting them? How do you know how to guide someone to where they want to be? Seduction design, all of these things are a sort of ways of playing with a person's desiring machines, and we don't know that they exist. So the first tool of schizoanalysis, the first thing is the positive and negative task. The positive task is my job is to sort of go in and have a conversation with you and say, hey, what are your desiring machines doing? Let's talk about building new ones and resituating them, reconnecting them. Now, at the same time, we need to have a conversation about your molar aggregate sort of investments, and my job is effectively to destroy those. I'm helping build the molecular and destroy the molar. And that's
totally, man. It's like you understand my dissertation before even reading it. It's like it's a really weird thing, but like it's really basic at the same time. There's nothing complicated there. And when you're saying, there's buildings are not inviting us, they're not inviting us for different reasons. For example, accessibility. That could be physical accessibility for people, or information accessibility. People cannot read the information, but I treat them in terms of affordances. How does the infrastructure is giving you possibilities of usage or not? So it suggests you a type of usage. So, who will go to the town hall? Who goes there? Not a lot of people, especially not people with disabilities during their day, but they're making those places accessible. They are accessible, but not inviting. So, and it becomes like a real problem for the cities and, the public servants, because they're like, we make stuff accessible and people don't come. That's because they don't want to go there. This is not inviting. What they want to do is to, go to the park, have leisures, be able to go buy pot at the third story of their pot dealer. They want to go to strippers or like whatever else. But this is the real stuff that people want to do. But the real stuff that is inviting to them is not accessible. So it becomes like a real difficulty within cities, because the cities, as molar aggregates, are trying to plan in advance the accessibility, but they're planning in their own terms, in their own molar terms. So they make the political or the public sphere accessible. They are trying to make shopping centers accessible, the big thing that integrate the mass population. But the little things are not really accessible. And I'm talking about archetypes of accessibility in the city. You want to go, you start from your house, you live in the middle of a neighborhood, and you want to go to the shopping mall, for example, because that's a place that is accessible for you, and it gives you different affordance, but also different possibilities of becoming, because this is where you can go and make social contacts with people. But you cannot move from your place to the main street where you're going to take the bus, because the sidewalks are not accessible. So, everything become hostile.
Well, this is, and now you're talking about the greatest problem in transport, which is the last mile problem.
Yes.
Which is the fact that you could have the world's greatest public transportation in the world. Most people won't use it if it doesn't get them the last mile to their house or to their work. And that defeats the entire purpose of having public transport once you get to that point.
Yeah, and that's the thing. But it's, I'm giving this into disability, into mobility as a concrete example.
Oh, it's a great example. It's also, I think, it's one of those things that you could just go absolutely insane in trying to find all of the little details. The overarching concept is absolutely the right. Like, I'm not disagreeing with it. I'm just saying, like, there's so far you can go into it, and so we start having to have the conversations, and this is that polar problem. At what point is accessibility too much? At what point are these things problems that are beginning to actually cause a drain on themselves? I linked Matthias Warch, brilliant game designer, who I'm fortunate to call a friend, has done a level design seminars at GDC every year. Probably one of the best thinkers when it comes to how to design worlds for people. So if you want to talk about worlds, Roger, you would actually love most of his talks. He doesn't deal with reality almost at all, but it's about how you get people in video games to believe they're in a real world, how you get people in video games to move around certain ways, and how to get them to open doors, how to get them to see stuff, and how their culture affects that, and how they were raised affects that. And the larger stories behind everything is really fascinating. Completely worth checking out.
Yeah, totally. I'll do that. But to go back to this point, I'm saying I'm giving this example because this is what I do. But we could go into sexuality, how the molar aggregates in sexuality, don't create a world with affordances with people with different desires. So, that's a thing. That's a real thing. But the molar aggregates create a city, creates a social space into a certain way so that different desires or different sexual orientation or sexual expression cannot really express themselves because they don't have the affordances to do so.
Yeah, and that's part of the territoriality in the coding.
Yes, and then you do like a gay village or like queer spaces, and you open new territories. And because you open new territories, desire will be organized into a different manner. And this organization feedbacks into the loop of the virtual, giving a way to more and more transformations. And then, if it becomes prevalent enough or hegemonic enough, it can change the molar aggregates.
Yeah, I agree. And so to bring this back into I think it's 4.4, and to go back to Brutz's original question of departure. So this passage seems really relevant here in terms of everything we're discussing, praxis, and even giving an answer to your question. So 328, it would seem that the genetic code points to a genetic decoding. One need only grasp the decoding and deterritorializing functions in their own positivity, inasmuch as they imply a particular chain state that is metastable and distinct both from any axiomatic and from any code. The molecular chain is the form in which the genic unconscious, always remaining subject, reproduces itself. And as we have seen, that is the primary inspiration of psychoanalysis. It does not add a code to all these that are already known. The signifying chain of the unconscious, Newman, is not used to discover or decipher codes of desire, but to cause absolutely decoded flows of desire, libido, to circulate, and to discover in desire that which scrambles other codes and undoes all the territorialities. It is true that Oedipus will restore psychoanalysis to the status of a simple code, with the familial territoriality and the signifier of castration. Worse yet, it will happen that psychoanalysis itself wants to act as an axiomatic, which is the famous turning point where it no longer even relates to the familial scene, but solely to the psychoanalytic scene that supposedly answers for its own truth, and to the psychoanalytic operation that supposedly answers for its own success. The couch is an axiomatized earth. The axiomatic of the so-called cure is the successful castration. But by recording or axiomatizing the flows of desire in this way, psychoanalysis makes a molar use of the signifying chain that results in a misappreciation of all the syntheses of the unconscious. So if we simply apply this to Roger's examples of what he's trying to encourage, right? This is pretty much it, right? Decoded and deterritorialized flows allow for libido to connect, to have connectability, to have new potentialities of connection.
So do we still have people with us?
Yeah, I mean, I put the question in the chat, but is it being said that Newman provides the possibility for new connections or the opportunity? Is that what's meant by scrambling and whatnot?
Yeah, so with Newman there, I think they're saying with the decodification, there's a way in which that's directly related to Newman, which is going to which is libidinal energy transformed into the second syntheses, right? And that's going to transform into the third syntheses, yeah. It's with the simultaneity of this, with the code scrambled.
Just not to stop. Newman is the energy of recording, correct? The second synthesis.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly the point, right? Like, if you've got a double bind, right, and you scramble the double bind, right, so you undo the paralogism, so to speak, that affects the territoriality, and that allows for libidinal energy to basically have connectability. So like the exclusions and like where they talk about the body without organs falling back on production. So if like the body without organs in relation to Newman, if that relationship changes, if there's a decoding, that falls back on production, and that affects how libidinal energy can connect and distribute, and how this process of desiring production flows thereby.
Roger, I have a question I think is going to be a French question. Because if we're talking about the second syntheses, I've wondered about this. I read a while back a guy who obviously spoke French far better than me. Said they use a play on words with the act of recording. They call it miraculant to indicate miraculous creation. And then the cule in miraculant is part of the pun, of course. I don't know what that means, and I've always wanted to ask you.
Q?
Yeah.
What Q is ass. So it's like spewing for the ass, spewing from the ass.
Okay, so it isn't miraculant is intended to be a pun.
I don't know about this, but in the way you put it, that could be a possibility.
Remember reading. So okay. Really quick, 3 syntheses. First is libidinal energy, that sort of birthing of things, the connective production. At that point, recording happens. That's Newman, and then enjoyment happens following that, and that's voluptas. The enjoyment, right?
Yeah, and with that, the body without organs falls back on production, right? So the recording and the miraculating and the surface and the territoriality, right, that all comes back to bear on production itself.
And because the BWO falls back on it appears, classically appears to be the productive surface, but it's not. It's the surface of recording, obviously. But the act of recording makes it appear productive. Cash, as an example, surplus value, those things. The way things are, that feels like it's productive, but it's not. The productive starts first in the first synthesis out of production. This is going to be one of the hardest. The 3 syntheses, I think, are probably my most difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Can I
Bo is
offer some?
Just one sec. Bo is saying something into the chat. The recording is that just describing the process of habit production. If we put it in Bergsonian terms, yes. And
yeah, I think that's fair. The moment you've defined something as a habit, yes, I would say that's the recording.
I kind of like the way Roger said it a few weeks ago, though, in the sense of like function production, or like what things will do. Like they give the example of the I can't think of the character, but the character who walks and then stops, and the different ways in which these functions are changing because of the inclusive synthesis for the syllogistic use of Newman.
I was just going to offer, since I keep constantly referring to Simondon, there's a section in the PDF that I linked that's the famous introduction to his Genesis of the Individual, which I haven't read, but I've repeatedly reread this essay, the introduction. But especially since they invoke the idea of metastable in the exact section that Jack quoted, it might be helpful. Like we've gone in a million directions with this, but what I'm seeing in this, like, even when we bring up examples of cash and these other things, like they do get to that, but that is also kind of on a much bigger scale. And I wonder if it would help if we're thinking about the molecular to like drill in a little bit. And to me, when they invoke something like a metastable system, that is like a direct line to Simondon. And one of the useful things I was just thinking about Simondon's discussion of the idea of crystals and how crystals grow. I think I put the quote of that in the chat, but one of the ways that he describes it is like it's a way of envisioning how individuation can happen in a way that is non-purposive and kind of bypassing all these problems that we see in psychoanalysis. So there's a section, just short thing I want to read, and then there's two different things I wanted to read. The first is Simonin talks about an idea of transduction. So he says, a fresh notion enjoying a great variety of aspects and many areas of application can be drawn from this method, which treats the principle of identity in the excluded middle as being too narrow. Transduction. This term denotes a process, be it physical, biological, mental, or social, in which an activity gradually sets itself in motion, propagating within a given area through a structuration of the different zones of the area over which it operates. Each region of the structure that is constituted in this way then serves to constitute the next one, to such an extent that at the very time the structuration is effected, there is a progressive modification taking place in tandem with it. The simplest image of the transductive process is furnished if one thinks of a crystal, beginning as a tiny seed which grows and extends itself in all directions in its mother water. Each layer of molecules that has already been constituted serves as the structuring basis for the layer that is being formed next, and the result is an amplifying reticular structure. The transductive process is thus an individuation in progress. Physically, it might be said to occur at its simplest in the form of a progressive iteration. However, in the case of more complex domains, such as those of living, metastability, or psychic problematics, it might progress at a constantly variable rate and expand in a heterogeneous area. Transduction occurs when there is activity, both structural and functional, which begins at a center of the being and extends itself in various directions from the center, as if multiple dimensions of the being were expanding around this central point. It is the correlative appearance of dimensions and structures in a being in a state of pre-individual tension, which is to say, in a being that is more than a unity and more than an identity, and which has not yet passed out of step with itself into other multiple dimensions. I can paste the section of this quote that's page 312 to 313 in the Simonin text, but I think it evokes so much of what they're getting at, like the idea of metastable systems, like the molecular chains that are non-signifying. Simonin has this thing where he talks about being conserving itself through becoming, and it is a process of not trying to resolve tensions into a stable equilibrium, but to continually push that equilibrium into a new state of becoming so that it can continue to exist. I see all of that in this section of what they're talking about, and it's a much more, crystals is a great example. It's like a much more drilled down kind of elemental way of thinking about it than the big kind of examples that we've been using. So I wanted to offer that as a potential,
Yeah, I think that's totally great. And I did apply the idea of the metastable to my own research. I'm if you don't want to hear about my research, it's fine. But I think it brings you back to people, because people with disabilities are people, and they're not different from us. So it's just a way of getting into the human experience for me. But this idea of metastability is, instead of thinking of identity or essence in the subject, we see the subject as it presents itself to us, and so the subject is metastable, but also the city and all the components of the city are metastable. So in temporality, you have the possibility of doing a synchronic analysis or a diachronic analysis. Synchronic is like a snapshot. It's like you take a picture and you describe what's in the picture. But the diachronic aspect of it is to take different pictures or take video into a timeline and analyze the changes. So, the best way would be to follow. They did something with the kid. They followed the kid all through his life, and they filmed everything. So you can see that it's the same individual, but always into a process of becoming. So there's no essential being. There's always essential becoming, and the being is the synchronic moment of the diachronic becoming. So and it's just not theoretical stuff. It's something that you can actually observe in reality. And that's what's really interesting with Deleuze and Simondon, even though it seems, theoretical and out of this world, it's really into this world. And it's great tools to do social analysis. So, Alyosha, I think you're totally right into focusing on this part, because I did the same thing, and it produces new ways of understanding reality.
Before we do close out for the day, I want to go over the last big question I had with this section. That is their implementation of the death drive, and the death drive, and how death essentially is part of the process of desiring machines, that there isn't a secondary drive. Does anyone have thoughts on that? Jack, I'm sure you do. I know we talked about it a little bit.
To open this up, I've done this to you before, Ken, so I don't feel bad doing it again now. Could you start this discussion with some remarks about the death drive in psychoanalysis, just so we have like a starting point here of like, because I think one of the keys to understand this is the juxtaposition that they're making.
Yeah, I can try. And I guess take my words with a grain of salt, because I'm not anywhere near a psychoanalysis expert or anything. But as I understand it, so the Freudian death drive is going to be slightly different from the Lacanian death drive, and both of those are very much different than what like Jung and Spielrein do with it. So for Freud, it's almost like the attempt to master one's own death, in a sense. And it in Beyond the Pleasure Principle, he talks about the mastery of excitations that break through this protective, or that come into a hole in the protective shield. That makes it complicated. Anyways, it's pretty much for Freud to master one's own death, and it plays out strangely. But for Lacan, and Freud juxtaposes that with Eros being a life drive. For Lacan, there is no difference. All drives act as death drives, in the sense that all drives have this insistence to repeat, and it's a specific insistence to repeat. It's the insistent to repeat in the symbolic order. And so you can sort of see the death drive on a personal level, on an interpersonal or transsubjective level, and then you can see it like on a historical level. So for on the personal level, it would be like experiencing a trauma, or the original trauma, the primordially repressed, and then there's an insistence to like recapitulate that event. So yeah, I mean, to recapitulate the trauma or whatever in one's acts throughout one's life. But in the end, he sort of says it all circles around the anxiety of the thing, which is the primordially repressed. And so on a more historical dimension for Lacan, in this insistence to repeat in the symbolic, you can see it in nostalgia. So I posted that member berries thing from South Park, and it's just like that. It works like that. So now we see recapitulated this whole slogan of "Make America Great Again." That's another example of this death drive. And then for Jung and Spielrein, it's closer to the destruction that's necessary for becoming. That the death drive doesn't circle around one thing, but that it circles around, maybe many different things, and its attempt is to create something new through channeling intensities.
Okay, so if we walk that into Anti-Oedipus, my impression here is that what they're saying is like, when Freud is going to make this move for the death drive, which I think is like Thanos or something like that. Is it Thanos or Thanatos? Thanatos. Okay, I was going to say I don't want to marvelize it. Thank you. So you get right Thanatos, and then that's opposed to Eros, which, like Deleuze and Guattari point out, is a way of Freud getting away from libido. Right. So like you've got two different drives that are pushing. If I understand correctly, are basically related to how the id and the ego are going to react and how that's going to play out psychologically. So I think when I think of the death drive, like the self-mastery over death seems to be something of like self-destructive behavior in the sense of you playing out how you would like, basically how you would end things. Yeah. Like, and I think this is kind of what they're getting at is like, that would appear for Freud to not only be non-libidinal, but it also seems to be a way of like quashing desire itself, but through desire is what they're getting at, right? Like there's sort of a slight a trick of the light here, whereas like Eros is like, since it's opposed and there's almost like a dialectical process here, that would seem to take us away from a libido and just take us in terms of like a self-destructive and maybe like more like life affirmative if we want to polarize the two. And in that, like Deleuze and Guattari's move seems to share that affinity with Lacan, is to say no, desiring production doesn't have this polarity where it's like it's got this dualism of death and life, and it's this it's not split into two, and it doesn't have this like bifurcation. More so, it's not like a river that flows into two different deltas altogether, and therefore there never was a river, but yet we have to have the river, right? Like this is kind of their point, is that it's there's a conflation happening despite the separation.
Yeah, I remember asking about this yesterday, and I think the distinction that I walked away from the conversation yesterday was that like the death drive in Freud is this sort of I guess antithesis of the Eros, the libidinal thing, and for Deleuze and Guattari, they're not really opposites. It's just they would talk about it like production and anti-production more, right?
Yeah, because like even in like, so if we walk it out like to that point, like with the death drive, how is libido absent? Like how is desiring production not happening there? Right, that's kind of their point, is that there's like this mistake happening in this weird separation that somehow like the whole thing isn't exactly going to work here. So like to your point, yeah, it's more about production and anti-production and their interplay, and in that sense, that's going to take us out of Thanatos and toward the body without organs.
And then I think the other thing they do is they talk about the way that the death drive is mobilized specifically in terms of like capitalism, and that's when we started getting into examples of like, you know, making weapons for war, or like, you know, just deciding people were going to die if they couldn't do something I was going to say productive, but I should have said valuable. Like if you can't get a job that makes enough wages to survive, you're just going to die. And they make points about that being a very cruel and kind of maybe like incorrect way of ordering society.
Well, they go really hard very quickly into, I think, deeply affirming Lacan's sort of underlying view that the death drive is about nostalgia. To Ken's point, and I started really diving into it, Lacan very much does basically say that is the case. Nostalgia is the death drive sort of in practice. They actually end this section with very much the same thing. The line, there where codes are undone, the death instinct lays hold of a repressive apparatus and begins to direct the circulation of the libido. A mortuary axiomatic. One might then believe in liberated desires, but ones that, like cadavers, feed on images. Death is not desired. What is desired is dead, already dead, images. Everything labors in death, everything wishes for death. In truth, capitalism has nothing to co-opt, or rather, its powers of co-option coexist more often than not with what is to be co-opted and even anticipated. It's a hell of a thing to say, and it's a great sentence.
Yeah, and in that, right, like you have desiring productions as being stymied in and of itself, right? So like how are connections supposed to happen with these with images, right? Like in that sense, like you're connecting with something that's that has nothing to really offer, right? And in that way, like desiring production, it's still affirmative, like you're saying, although we don't really have the anxiety or like the neuroticism that would typically be ascribed here. But like the whole like the like a vitalism here is sort of like off the table, right? Like it's desiring something that's not absent but that is present and effectively over and done with, and in that way desire is desiring to be over and done with.
So I'm seeing the affinity with Lacan in the sense of Lacan doesn't seem to hold up a dualism like Freud does between eros and thanatos, and I'm also seeing a like serious criticism where they're saying that like these dead images sort of proliferate the death drive and into desire and like everywhere it can possibly look if you're only interacting psychologically with an imaginary plane. And that's the affirmative stuff that Jack was talking about, that schizoanalysis wants to move towards the affirmative in the material and be like, unleash these living desires that can threaten this entire regime of images. And examples of that would be like the art of Artaud, or the protests or revolution.
The paragraph on 330, I think, is really helpful here. For instance, they write, every intensity controls within its own life the experience of death and envelops it. And it is doubtless the case that every intensity is extinguished at the end, that every becoming itself becomes a becoming death. Death then does actually happen. Maurice Blanchot distinguishes the twofold nature clearly, these two irreducible aspects of death. But I'll stop there. Like, with this point about like where they're getting at here is like it helps me to think about like syllogism versus like paralogism, or like like in this sense, like so if we use the member berries, right, like what happens with those desires, right? Like the people in South Park are there's still desiring production happening, but there's a sense in which they're what the desiring machines and all that, like at the smaller level, are trying to be connected, or rather the social machines are trying to be connected with something that's really not they're still connecting, but it's not really living, is it, right? Like or with like Make America Great Again, like none of us were actually there. Well, many of us were not there for like the whole Reagan thing, and what really matters isn't what actually happened with the Reagan thing. What really matters is like the things that are ascribed to the Reagan era, the images there. And that's what people are trying to connect with, right? Is those images, those like representations of that era. And in that way, like the desiring production that's happening has this weird sort of double vision with those images, right? Like there's a way in which it's desiring production and social production are still occurring, but there's this weird like sort of like repressing representation that's inserted here.
Yeah, I really like what you said about double vision and repressing representation, because I think that's part of what's confusing about this section for me, is the idea of that double vision where they're looking at okay, so take for example the situation you brought up with Trump, where I think you're dead on that a lot of people like the slogan, the Make America Great Again. A lot of that is expressing a desire for that Reagan era of politics. But a lot of people, like I wasn't around for it either, right? Like it's not like it's really weird to imagine a psychoanalyst looking at those people's desires for Reagan and being like, well, that must be the really important thing. That must be what we should look at as psychoanalysts. And I think that the criticism is that Deleuze and Guattari are like, well, no, there's other stuff happening here. They're making things, and we should look at what they're making.
But that's the part of the imaginary, in the sense that believing into the America Great Again thing is to go back and idealize certain memories or past representation as temporal blocks and saying it was so much easier back then, it was so much better back then. So if we will go back into a reactionary way, we could actually make this greatness happen again. But it's completely factious representation, because it was shit in the fucking 80s, but or the 50s or the 60s, women were like stuck into the domestic sphere and all that stuff. Gay people were oppressed, there was that was before the civil rights movements. But the thing is that it taps into some weird, backward and idealized temporality. But at the same moment, believing in this representation and putting it into action produces stuff right now, produces the alt-right, produces the Proud Boys, produces all the racists out there coming out saying, yeah, I hate this group, I hate this other group. But it also creates QAnon, because these skewed memories actually produces a skewed present. It produces an alternative present that is being tapped into this greatness being reenacted. So it's a really weird thing, and I think that it's a full paranoiac, and it's a full it's schizophrenic in the real sense, in the same, and there's alternative realities that are being created right now. So it's interesting to see it in psychoanalytic way.
Yeah, and that's exactly it.
Yeah.
With the Reagan thing, the whole interest is the image of Reagan, right? The images of people in those 80s suits that were too big to fit the person, because that was the style. The image of the domesticated housewife, right? Those images and that connection is what's being is happening, right? That. But at the same time, like you're saying, there's a way in which the production of that and what's actually imminently being produced, I'm calling it a double vision, because I don't think it exactly lines up, because it's not actually an engagement with the past. It's very much the present engaging with the present. And that is kind of the interest of it, right? Is that all this production is still happening imminently now, even though these images have ended or dead. There's still this connection that's producing in the immediate.
Well, and maybe an interesting way, I had the idea of furthering your metaphor about the double vision, right? Where I think Deleuze and Guattari's criticism of Lacan is it's easy to imagine a psychoanalyst kind of closing one eye and looking at an alt-writer and being like, okay, all of these images, the secret to your trauma, the way of addressing your situation is to look at all these images that you valorize or long for or whatever, and I can piece them together regarding your childhood trauma and Oedipus, and I can make sense of this, and I can help you become a more well-adjusted person, so you're not posting on QAnon boards or something right now, and you can function at your workplace without screaming about Pizzagate. Exactly. Whereas, and Deleuze and Guattari are no, that's the wrong reaction.
But before you go on, I would just say something. This is the diagnosis of the incel. When we say that they are incels, it's because we're putting this into the repression of sexual desire, and that's the work of the psychoanalysis. So please let go about the alternative with Deleuze.
No, I mean, I don't know if I even had anything even better to add on that. It's just that's what the criticism they're getting at, that I think we had some question about, is that it's easy to imagine that psychoanalysts looking at the incel and being like, oh, I can just figure out why you're aggressive towards women, or why you form this weird misogynist community on the internet. It doesn't have anything to do with the material conditions of society or the things you're actively engaged in producing. Instead, it has to do with this childhood trauma or this, relationship.
Well, specifically, it's going to be a psychoanalyst who gets the analyst's hand to tell him what the problem comes from. But the line that they use that I really like is illegitimate and transcendent uses of the syntheses, according to which the unconscious can no longer operate in accordance with its own machines, but it merely, this is the quote, represents what a repressive apparatus gives it to represent. Repression shows you can't have an image that doesn't include repression if it's got repression in it. And so by nature, you're sort of diagnosing the sickness by one thing that the sickness produces and then assuming you've got it, rather than really taking a look at holistically everything that's happening to the person.
Exactly. So it's always a matter of multiplicities and not of unique factors. So, if you're trying to do a cause effect with like one factor, you're wrong. You're just wrong. So like social sciences that does this is just wrong. Psychoanalysis or psychology that does this is wrong either. You need to see the whole ecology. Now, it's a machine of production into the multiplicity of couplings.
Well, and that's their larger critique and their larger sort of damnation, I think, and frustration that comes through here is when they're like, and we happen to live in a time, lo and behold, just like Oedipus produces Oedipal images, we live in a time where everything is about image production. That's the system we live in. We're beyond investing in capital. We now create images. And everything is images. Repression will create repressive images. The unconscious doesn't know what it's doing, it's just producing. And it's that underlying thought about the time we live in that I think is really interesting.
I was going to say, this reminds me of, if anyone's ever read Talal Asad, he has a great book called On Suicide Bombing. And he analyzes kind of like the discourse around like professional counterterrorism and trying to reconstruct like the motivations of the suicide bomber and stuff. And it's a great little, it's only like 90 pages, but it's a wonderful text, because not even from a Deleuzian angle, just from his like sort of, he's more Foucauldian, but he's just deconstructing like how this whole discourse of official counterterrorism studies kind of self-justifies itself, and it's unable to ask like the elephant in the room question of like, could we have caused these situations ourselves with like foreign policy and the way we've treated these countries and funded these groups? It's none of that. The only thing that it can ever see is why, like, it's that old kind of question, why do they hate us? Like, why do they hate us so? Why do they hate our freedom? How could they be so evil to do this thing? And obviously, we're talking about horrific acts and all that, but it's like, it's this, he goes into the morality of like the idea of the moral generals versus the barbarians who have no discrimination in their violence and stuff. And I think, wherever we see this stuff crop up, it's always like it's like that old Foucault thing is like, when you say something is a science, I ask you, how did it come to be a science? What authorized you to say it's a science? Like, that's the question we should always be asking whenever these official discourses are like, oh yeah, see, the reason this happened is because they dislike British values or they dislike American values. You're like, okay, but that's so decontextualized from everything that's happening. Like, we could be doing this for 200 years until like I always bring up the troubles in Northern Ireland. Like, they didn't end the troubles because they psychoanalyzed the northern the Irish and the rest of the Republic of Ireland and decided how to best bring about peace. It was a political solution, so yeah, it's what always makes me think about.
And I think one thing Deleuze, Guattari, and Foucault would agree on is we never actually listen to what that bomber has to say, right? Like, we always deal with representations of it at some level, which is how we get this whole like, oh yeah, well, they just hate freedom, right? They hate freedom so much they want to be free from our freedom. But like, it becomes very tautological.
It's that old David Cross did a bit right after 9/11 where he said, I think bin Laden did what he did because of our support for Israel and our bases on the Middle East. Do you know why I believe that? Because that's what he said.
Yeah, I think that's another interesting thing. It's like the hermeneutics of suspicion taken to its absolute crudest and like most childish level of like, they can literally think of everything except what is being stated. Like, and all of the, you could say they have alternative motives and they're manipulative and obviously like, despicable, killing innocent people. It's all like that, but just they're in these experts are unable to look at a statement like, we committed this act because of the occupation of Palestine and because of this, and this, and Afghanistan. They're like, no, it has to be something else. Like, there has to be something.
Well, if you want a line that I think is spot on, it's right before what I read before. It's the you can never read the repressed through and in the repression, since the latter is constantly inducing a false image of the thing it represses. It's, that's spot on. That's beyond spot on when you're dealing with Trumpers who actively are having conversations that Biden and Obama have been arrested by the FBI and are in custody right now. This is a thing. I'm not making up right now.
This is like full LARPing, isn't it? Like we've really reached that point.
Yeah, but the thing is, we're now reading them through their repression. Like this is the image they've got, the repression they've got. This is the setup, and it's not so much to take an empathetic eye, but to understand that their repression is creating these images, and we can't read them through the repressive image that they're telling us because that's how that works. It creates false images. Obama's a communist. There's a secret police that are going to fix things. Donald Trump's leading them because he's a big, strong man who doesn't definitely wear diapers. This is the place they're living, but we can't read them through that. That's the repression. That's they've got the illegitimate and transcendent uses of the syntheses, according to which the unconscious can no longer operate in accordance with its own constituent machines. So the idea of us, like schizoanalysts, the schizo police, whatever we want to call ourselves, the idea is not so much to just read people, which is the classic psychoanalytic way, but instead to really talk about the material conditions of their desiring machines, their connections, and their social machines, find where the breakdowns are, destroy the molar connections, and build new ones for the molecular.
Can I just vote we never call ourselves schizo anything?
I'm going to call ourselves the Schizo Police, and I'm going to give us a 1980s fucking, theme song, and it's going to be an intro, and we're all going to be dogs. And that's a Saturday morning cartoon, the Schizo Police.
But I want to say something about, we're always talking about the bad guys, but social sciences does that as well, not listening to people directly. For example, anthropology would actually talk to, one guy from one community or one woman from one community, and they will not listen directly to what the person is saying. They will say, oh, that's the parental structure being, explained to us through this mundane formulation of words into a sentence. No, motherfucker, you need to listen to what they're saying, because, it's the same thing. We have the same weird way of, taking a structure in the back and just cookie cutting on people. And this is my old criticism. When I say cookie cutting, it's exactly this.
And it's listening and it's not representing it, right? Because that's the other thing, right? Like psychoanalysis it's like with the example of the terrorist, right? Like there's a way in which psychoanalysis could very easily listen to that and say, oh, okay, we've got it. So this is a death drive manifestation of anxiety because of a lost time in in Saudi Arabia or whatever. Like you see how that works, right? The representation replaces what we actually should be listening to.
Yeah, and it's even better when the subject isn't around to testify, because then you have this whole great sort of counterfactual discourse where you're like, well, they're dead, but we're going to tell you why they did what they did. It's for the following reason. So it's almost worse for them when the person survives, because then it kind of confounds the ability to pin down it, the narrative on a specific thing, or simply say this person is crazy or mad, or they'll still do that and they'll have success, but I think it poses a problem for the discourse.
And that's the same for social research. A lot of people will not actually write and go back to the people which they wrote about and have them, look at the text and see if it's accurate or not. Why? Because we're lying, and that's what social research is doing. It's confirming certain things, but we don't want it to be really close to the people and want the people to really participate. On the other end, when you start to do this, you do really fuzzy kind of research. And I think, this is the kind of stuff that I've done. That's an attempt. I was sure that I would fail, but, it kind of worked out. But that's why now, when we're saying, oh, we need to amplify the voice of people, we need to do this, we need to do that. And it appears to be radical, which is a really basic thing. This is what we should be doing at all time. But what social sciences are doing right now, they're stealing the voice out of people to reframe them into a certain manner to prove certain points. And that's a huge problem within academia.
Cannibal Metaphysics when, Roger?
Yes.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
I got a copy, so whenever we want to go down that rabbit hole, I'm ready.
God damn, it's a good book.
That would be perfect, because like if we want to link Deleuze to like anthropology, that's a perfect link to do it. And I think there's a lot of fuzziness to this writing, but I think it's really interesting because it taps more into ontologies than epistemologies, and that was my that was one of my first ways into this subject. So I think we should definitely go into that book one day.
Maybe post AO. I mean, it would be a great antidote to a lot of the problems we probably have had with this text.
Oh yes, and it's really contested too. It's not something that is widely accepted.
All right, so before I turn off the recording, I'm just going to ask one last question, and I'd love everyone to give a shot. I think actually the last thing I said might be my answer, so I'm just going to leave it in. What is the first task? Schizoanalysis. First positive task. A lot of paragraphs on that, and a lot of pages. What is first positive task? Positive task, though, comes with the negative task of destruction. What is the task?
Becoming plumber.
There you go. So I'll start with like a quote. So page 338. Here are the desiring machines with their three parts: the working parts, the immobile motor, the adjacent part. Their three forms of energy, libido, numen, and voluptas, and their three syntheses, the connective syntheses of partial objects and flows, the disjunctive syntheses of singularities and chains, and the conjunctive syntheses of intensities and becomings. The schizoanalyst is not an interpreter, even less a theater director. He is a mechanic, a micromechanic. There are no excavations to be undertaken, no archaeology, no statues in the unconscious. There are only stones to be sucked out of Beckett and other machinic elements belonging to deterritorialized constellations. The task of schizoanalysis is that of learning what a subject's desired machines are, how they work, with what syntheses, what bursts of energies in the machine, what constituent misfires, with what flows, what chains, and what becomings in each case. Moreover, this positive task cannot be separated from indispensable destructions, the destruction of the molar aggregates, the structures and representations that prevent the machines from functioning. In the unconscious, it is not the lines of pressure that matter, but on the contrary, the lines of escape. So, if we want to summarize this, right, the positive task is one taking into account the syllogisms and paralogisms, right? Engaging matters and engaging what's going on imminently, in terms of the desire machines and how the unconscious is producing it in this passive way. In the negative sense, there's a way in which blockages, representations, and even structures are going to be blown up, right? And this is going to make room for the syllogisms to operate more fully, shall we say. To that point, I really like this last sentence. On the unconscious, it is not the lines of pressure that matter, but on the contrary, the lines of escape. I like that line too, because with that schizoanalysis also, as far as I can tell, it's going to help with this idea of deterritorializing and decoding, this idea of taking a piece of structure with you as this line of escape takes you upon the body without organs, right, and out of the problem of the Socius's conditionings.
I do want to take a second, because I know we've had the joke about the stone sucking. It's actually a really interesting callback to the second page of the book. The second page basically has a lot of Malone Malloy, Samuel Beckett rep. Well, Lisa Lick-Moss, when they were stranded in the Lord of the Flies episode, and she was cast out because she wouldn't eat meat, being vegetarian. Lord of the Flies scenario. Funny.
Okay, so basically forces to lick stones because we're vegans?
No, sucks. The stones is a scene from Malloy, and it's a long couple paragraphs, about how he has a bunch of stones that he sucks on, and he's just got them in his pockets, and how he sort of moves them around between his pockets. Page 3 of the text, actually. Being confronted with a complete machine made up of 6 stones in the right-hand pocket of my coat, the pocket that serves as the source of the stones. 5 stones in the right-hand pocket of my trousers, 5 in the left-hand pocket, with the remaining pocket of my coat receiving the stones that have already been handled. Each of the stones moves forward 1 pocket. How can we determine the effect of this circuit of distribution? And this is their take on it, in which the mouth too plays a role as a stone-sucking machine. In Malloy, it's literally that. It's him describing how he moves the stones between the different pockets, what his process is, and ultimately placing them in his mouth. Their argument is actually, no, there's a mouth too, plays a role in the stone-sucking machine. This entire circuit, where do we find the production of sexual pleasure? Where do these things happen in this story? And it's a really interesting sort of tale of, it's not always just sucking stones, but it is a stone-sucking machine.
Yeah, that's kind of it, right? Because there's a way in which psychoanalysis would look at that and say, oh, you've got an oral fixation, right? Like there's a psychosexual problem there. But their point is like, no, not necessarily, right? Like there's a whole process, right? Like it's not necessarily a rational problem, but more to the sense of like, there's a way in which this is being produced, and it's not necessarily like a problem with sexuality. It's something that's actively desired.
Well, the scene is a neurotic one where the character is talking about sort of, he's got all these pockets, and he's not super satisfied with the idea of just taking out all 4, putting them in his mouth, sucking on 4 stones, taking them out, putting them back in that pocket. He wants to develop the system, this machine of stone sucking, and over time it's this neurotic demand that he finds a way that satisfies him with all 4 of his pockets sort of in use, and that he feels like he can get one, and he feels like he could have a process for his, fuck it, I'm bored, what else can I do? It literally ends with him saying, fuck it. Or maybe not literally, but I'm pretty sure that's the end of the scene. And so it's this, like, neurotic demand for the machine of stone sucking. I'll copy it in. I think I'm going to say that we're done here, though, because this has gone now 2.5 hours, and I'm going to just say, I'm going to end on stone sucking. Thank all of you for joining us for our review. Next week we will be moving into 4.5. New month, new everything, ending the year out. Probably 4.5 is going to be the rest of the year. Let's see what happens. Thanks so much.